The question is, what do you think of when you hear the term fully automatic? If you're like most people, you've probably pictured machine guns, perhaps even World War II era ones that can be set to fire at a ridiculous 1,200 rounds per minute. You might also think about how you could never own one in the United States unless you fall into certain categories that are exempt from the restrictions imposed by the National Firearms Act of 1934. But what if we told you there was a pistol out there that fires just as fast but falls outside the legal definition of a machine gun? This would mean it could be sent through the U.S. Postal Service without special permission and purchased without a background check or having your name run through any sort of registry. In fact, you can buy them off the shelf anywhere. And did we mention they hold up to 140 rounds? Stick with us until the end of this episode to find out what that pistol is and why it's so controversial. You know what else is really controversial? It's the fact that our channel isn't subscribed to yet. So take care of that right now and join the family. And stick around for more revelations about that pistol. The federal government classifies machine guns as any weapon that shoots, quote, automatically more than one shot without manual loading by a single function of the trigger. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives determines what constitutes a single function of the trigger based on the intent of the firearm's designer and the end user. Their website states that to be considered one shot, the trigger must be, quote, intentionally squeezed and released, whereas the pull and release is one continuous action by the shooter. Once the trigger has been reset, the second shot can be fired by another squeeze of the trigger. But here's where things get interesting. The ATF goes on to say that some weapons may be designed to allow multiple rounds to be fired by a single pull of the trigger, without the shooter physically doing anything additional beyond maintaining pressure on the trigger. But if the shooter intentionally maintains pressure on the trigger after the first shot and before the firing of subsequent rounds, then each shot is considered to be fired by a separate and distinct function of the trigger. Therefore, under this definition, a weapon that fires multiple rounds when the trigger is pulled and held in place could be considered semi-automatic. To see why this matters, let's look at the Glock 18. It fires in full auto mode, which means it will continue firing as long as the trigger is pulled, delivering between 900 and 1,200 rounds per minute depending on the model. Because of this, it falls under the NFA's definition of machine gun. But what if we removed the switch that allowed the shooter to fire in full auto, and now it only shot 3 rounds when the trigger was pulled, resetting after the third shot so that the next shot would require a fresh trigger pull? Since the shooter is doing something, squeezing and releasing the trigger every time they want to fire a shot, wouldn't that mean it's not a machine gun? According to the ATF, no. They would still consider it a machine gun because the designer's intent, based on the existence of the full auto switch, was for the weapon to fire multiple rounds with a single pull of the trigger. Because of this, it's classified as an illegal machine gun, even though the end user can only fire 3 rounds before needing to pull the trigger again. In 1986, the Hughes Amendment made it illegal to manufacture civilian versions of machine guns that had been in production at the time the amendment passed. Because of this, companies have gotten creative with their designs. Take the Rising 556, for instance. It was inspired by the World War II era M1918A0 Rising, but it doesn't use the same parts. Instead, it uses a bolt and recoil rod assembly from the AR-15, and it has a detachable box magazine. These changes were made specifically to avoid classification as a machine gun under the NFA. When the ATF tested one in 1988, they found that it fired 3 shots with a single pull of the trigger and then jammed. Because of this, they considered it semi-automatic and not a machine gun. However, they changed their mind in 1994 after the designer modified his prototype to fire 5 shots and then stop. The ATF deemed it a machine gun once again, because it was originally designed to shoot more than 1 round with a single trigger pull, even though it couldn't actually do that when they tested it. These examples illustrate just how much leeway the ATF has when it comes to determining what is and isn't a machine gun. Now let's talk about the pistol you've been waiting for. The one that shoots nearly 1,200 rounds per minute and holds up to 140 rounds. It's called the Scorpion, and it's made by a company called Shadow Systems. The first thing you'll notice about it is its strange appearance. It looks kind of like a Glock, especially since Shadow Systems openly admits it was modeled after the Glock 17. But it also bears a striking resemblance to the P90 made by FN Herstal, a Belgian firearms manufacturer. When you look at it from the top, the barrel is completely enclosed, which makes sense considering it fires from a 50-round drum magazine that sticks out the bottom. The trigger guard is completely separate from the frame, and there is a small red dot at the front of the slide that serves as a visual indicator of whether the gun is loaded. Unlike traditional pistols, the Scorpion slide doesn't move vertically. Instead, it moves down and forward, pushing the spent casing out of the top of the gun. But it's what's inside the pistol that makes it so controversial. The Scorpion's inner workings are completely different from other pistols. Instead of using a traditional hammer, it has a linear, delayed blowback mechanism. Basically, when the trigger is pulled, the firing pin, which is located in the middle of the slide, strikes the primer, setting the round off. After that, the slide is blown back, extracting the spent casing and inserting a new round from the magazine. This happens faster than the average pistol because the slide is being pushed back by the force of the rearward gas piston. The delay is created by a spring that allows the firing pin to remain in place until the pressure from the newly fired cartridge drops below a certain amount. Because of this, the Scorpion is able to fire faster than a traditional blowback design while still cycling reliably and accurately. But it also means that if you pull the trigger, it will keep firing as long as the trigger is held in place, firing at around 1,200 rounds per minute. But wait, didn't we already go over how that wasn't technically possible without creating a machine gun? We did, but the Scorpion isn't your typical pistol either, even though it has a single-action trigger, meaning the slide is only moved rearward by the force of the expanding gases from the recently fired round. It also has a very interesting magazine. It uses a 50-round drum magazine that's inserted from the bottom, similar to the FN P90, but unlike the P90, the Scorpion's magazine is removable. It also loads and operates differently from the P90, instead of using a rotary feeding mechanism. The Scorpion strips rounds off the top of the stack in the magazine. Because of this, it doesn't need a special feeding ramp or bolt carrier to strip and align the cartridges. So let's go back to that controversy we mentioned earlier. How does the Scorpion manage to fire more than one round with a single pull of the trigger without being classified as a machine gun? The answer, oddly enough, lies in the way the magazine is inserted into the pistol. You see, the magazine has a locking lug on the side that engages with a cam on the frame when it's inserted all the way. This cam locks the magazine in place and prevents it from being removed until the pistol is empty. The only way to remove the magazine is to press a button located on the left side of the frame, which disengages the cam and releases the magazine. Now, remember how we said the Scorpion doesn't use a traditional hammer? Well, the magazine actually acts as the hammer in this case. It has a flat plate on the top that swings downward, resting against the frame when the magazine is fully inserted. This plate can also be lifted upward, which allows the magazine to be removed. And when it's lifted, it drops the firing pin below it, decocking the pistol. This means that the only way to cock the hammer, which is necessary to fire the gun, is to insert the magazine. As soon as the magazine is inserted and locked into place, the plate swings downward, cocking the firing pin. Therefore, pulling the trigger won't do anything until the magazine is inserted and cocked. Also, the trigger is completely separate from the magazine release button, meaning you can't remove the magazine while the trigger is pulled. This means you have to release the trigger before removing the magazine, which makes it just a regular old semi-automatic pistol. So there you have it, a pistol that shoots nearly 1,200 rounds per minute and holds 50 rounds without falling under the legal definition of machine gun. One might wonder why Shadow Systems went through all the trouble to design such a complicated pistol. Perhaps it was done purely for sport shooting. Or maybe they wanted to make something that looked different. Whatever the reason, it's clear that the Scorpion is a unique and controversial firearm that pushes the boundaries of what's possible. What do you guys think? Is the Scorpion a machine gun in disguise? Let us know in the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode.